Hi and welcome back. Today let's paint a stormy, cloudy sky blowing in over the sea. I'm going to paint it wet in wet with very large Hake brush, and I'm using Millford 140-pound paper. It's taped to my board. It's not pre-stretched. It will flatten out when it dries. My board's at an angle of about 45 to 60 degrees. Now I'm using this large cheap Chinese bamboo Hake brush to wet the paper all over, just making sure it's nice and wet as the water is running down a bit because of the angle of the board. I'm going to mix up some medium strength yellow ochre, and I'm just going to run it across the sky area, maybe a little bit into the sea area, just to start off the sky, starting off with the lighter colours. Now I want a little bit of blue sky peeping out on the right hand side, so this is mostly cobalt blue, a little bit of cerulean. Just want to make it look like the storm clouds are chasing away the blue sky. Now I'm going in for the storm clouds, and I want indigo, paynes grey and vandyke brown, and I'm going to pull that across the top left. Try and make sure it's thick enough because it is running down. As you can see, as it runs down near the top, it gets lighter excuse me, as the paint dilutes. So I'm just going to keep adding more and more paint, and then a little bit of water across the top there. You can see it's starting to run now, but still trying to push it back across the top, and then bring some strands of darker clouds across near the horizon. Now that's nice. The wet paint is running really beautifully. I'm adding some more indigo, a bit more water to get it to really run a bit more, and then I'll turn my board around to stop the running of the paint and water all the way down. And now we'll let it run this way, which should give us the direction of our looming storm clouds a bit better. And just move the wash around however you want, and watch the run of the paint, and then if it runs too much one way, tilt it the other. But the beauty of this sort of wet in wet painting with lots of water and lots of paint is that you can really create some wonderful dramatic skies. I'm just going to push on a bit more dark paint because it's not quite dark enough on the left side where I want the storm to be coming in from. I want a nice contrast with the blue and the yellow ochre on the other side. Turn it round, just allow that new paint to diffuse that I've added to diffuse into the sky and to run down. You can just see how wet the board is and how rich and wet the paint is as you can watch it running down, which I find very exciting. I really enjoy painting like this. Just using a small Hake brush, a Ron Ranson Pro Art one, just to feather out some of these marks a little bit more. I've just tipped it around on the diagonal again, just to set the paint a little bit more. Right, the paint has stopped running quite as much, and I'm quite liking the way this underlayer is looking. I'm just going to add a bit more indigo and paynes grey across the sort of horizon and kind of establish that horizon line a little bit more strongly. Clean damp brush, I can sort of pull out a line there. That will probably fill in, but that will help just to flatten out the horizon and show the difference between the sea and the sky. So I'm just adding a sweep of vandyke brown and paynes grey across the bottom, just to establish a little bit of a sort of a headland across the front, sort of a bit of a foreground. I don't want there to be much there. just using a 3/4 inch flat brush to feather out some of the storm clouds a little bit more. And using the 3/4 inch flat brush and a piece of tissue or kitchen towel in my hand, I am now starting on the fairly long job this time of lifting out clouds. It's going to be quite a long job because as I lift the clouds out by scrubbing a clean damp brush across the paint, removing it and then cleaning it on a tissue and then going back and doing some more, there's so much paint and water on the page that it's sort of filling in the areas that I'm lifting out, but that's all right because that's giving me nice soft edges for my clouds. As the paint dries and as I lift out more, I'll gradually end up with some harder edges as well, so there'll be some variety to these clouds. There'll be lights and shadows, soft and hard edges. So hopefully that will give me a sort of eventually a three-dimensional look to the cloud. Trying to feather out the marks as I go towards the right hand side. But because it's all still wet, these marks should all just soften back and diffuse quite nicely. I'm still not quite getting the amount of clouds that I want, so I'm going to just put a bit more shadow back into underneath some of the clouds, I think. Just moving the paint around, sort of redistributing it really, so I can get some more three-dimensionality to the sky. And then I think I'm going to go in very, very gently in a minute with a tissue and see if I can just pull out a little bit more. So let's just feather out some lines into the sky, just fine lines to look like the perspective of the clouds running across that sort of brighter, bluer piece of sky. I think we're nearly there. I still want to pull out a few more lights from these clouds, but when you're doing something like this and the paper's very, very wet, take your time. You can't rush it. It's kind of like building up layers of lifting, if you know what I mean. This way you end up with fairly realistic looking clouds rather than it looking like you've just sort of, I don't know, dabbed a tissue over it, which is what I'm going to do. But if you'll watch, I'm being very, very, very gentle with the tissue and I'm just lifting out just a few bits here and there. I'm just going over my existing clouds and trying to just enhance them a bit more. What the tissue does is that it soaks off nearly all the water from the paper and gives you a much, much harder edge in places. So be very careful. You can end up with some very, very hard marks. But I'm just literally touching a tiny area of the tissue here just to try and bring some just a few highlights into the cloud area. Now back with the flat brush just for a few more feathered out and lifted lines, moving the paint around in places, lifting it out in others, just trying to really bring the sky together. Just adding a few more marks here and there, maybe a bit more lifting. Not much, but just trying to take the clouds off the left-hand side of the board. Now I'm going to take the corner of a plastic store card and I'm just going to drag it through that very thick paint there on the foreground headland or beach, just to sort of bring through and open up a little bit more texture and light. Now we've nearly finished with the wet in wet stage. I'm just going to use the flat brush. It's clean, it's damp, and I'm going to pull out a sort of reflection line across through the water, through the sea, and then I'm going to drag it from side to side using the very fine tips of the brush just to add some texture and the look of waves. And hopefully that should look okay when it dries. So now I'm just going to leave it to dry. Well, it's dry now, so I'm taking my 3/4 inch flat brush again. I'm mixing up a little bit of mostly cobalt blue, a little bit of cerulean blue, and I'm going to just carefully paint in the reflection of the sky into the sea. I'm going to come in carefully from the right side and sweep the brush along, keeping it nice and horizontal. I just want a bit of colour beneath the blue sky in the sea. Just going to try and make sure I keep my horizon nice and flat if I can. I don't want the blue to be too thick here. I just want it to just be sort of a brightish hint of transparent colour. I'm just going to pull it down across the water here, a little bit further down, and just to add a bit more reflection, and then some more yellow ochre will go in. Just a bit of yellow ochre across near the front, just bringing it up in the joining area between the beach and the sea, keeping the brush horizontal. And I think that's just about finished. Let's take the tape off, carefully tearing the tape away from the painting so that if it was to catch and tear the paper, it will tear away from the painting and not into it. As I've painted, as it's dried, the paper flattens beautifully when it's taped like this. As you can see, the white border really brings out that lovely dark across the top, and where the yellow ochre and the blue is just being chased away by the clouds. I think I might just take a little bit of the sort of brownish mixture on the tips of the flat brush and just very carefully put in a few sweeps of shadow, just to sort of bring out the shadows and form on the tide line. Not much, just a little tiny bit, just to finish it off. I think that just balances it out a little bit more. And here's the finished picture. I mean, it took a little while to lift out the clouds, but I think the effect has worked very nicely. I think if you carefully build up your layers with either a brush or tissue, or possibly a combination of both like I used here, you can end up with some really interesting effects after a bit of practice. Well, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. And thanks so much to my wonderful Patreon group for your support, which is very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting me on Patreon, please follow the link above. Well, I hope you give this a try. Let me know how you get on, and take care, stay safe, have a lovely weekend, and happy painting. See you soon. Bye.